You can also help the project become even better by becoming a patron. You can see more information about all the benefits involved by visiting patreon.com/Force13. With a special thanks to these people for being our most valued patrons this month. You can also check out our growing merch store so you can show Force 13's colours wherever you go. You can also find a link to our Discord server underneath this video in the description. You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Hurricane Dorian is still a ferocious storm this afternoon as we enter the afternoon hours of Monday, the 2nd of September, and we've been following this storm for quite a few days now. It's been continuing to decimate the northernmost islands of the Bahamas. The National Hurricane Center have just issued their 12 p.m. update, which doesn't tell us very much new at this time, but still with winds. If you've just seen the information for the first time, they downgraded it to a Category 4 at the 11 a.m. advisory, and at 12 p.m. it's still 155 miles an hour and a pressure of 922 millibars. Positions 26.8 north, 78.4 degrees west, 25 miles northeast of Freeport, which is undoubtedly getting hurricane conditions which have been sustained since the overnight hours, possibly 12 hours. This storm is still producing wind gusts of 190 miles per hour and a storm surge of 18 to 23 feet above normal tide levels with higher destructive waves. The storm's been generally tracking well overnight. It continued to trend west, but this morning we've started to notice it's certainly slowed down a lot and more of a northerly component into the storm's track. It went further north than the 5 a.m. National Hurricane Center forecast, and at the moment it is already starting to trend a few miles north of the 11 a.m. forecast just from an hour ago, already 3 miles north of their track forecast. Doesn't sound like much at the moment, but if that continues to, if the discrepancy continues to rise, then that could make a big difference as to whether Florida gets destructive conditions or not. It is still rather likely that Florida will get hurricane force conditions somewhere along the coast. Tropical storm conditions will begin later today, very soon actually. But as we look at the storm now, it has weakened. There's no denying that it is weakening at this point, but it still contains winds that under normal circumstances and under any circumstances we'd still say are extremely life-threatening. And just because it's weakened a whole 30 miles an hour from yesterday, it was at such a high peak that this still now is still massive and is a CDPS stage 7. My name's Nathan Foy. I'm joined by the team for this hour of discussion consisting of Orlando, Devon, Isaac, and Tim. Good afternoon to you all.
Hello.
Hello.
I don't know who wants to begin on their thoughts of the storm, but go right ahead.
This is something that I just find to be absolutely incredible. Is that this thing is moved? This thing moved over Grand Bahama, started moving over Grand Bahama last night, and it hasn't moved since last night. It really hasn't. It's not a very big island that it's got to clear, and it just hasn't moved, which means that Grand Bahama has been experiencing major hurricane force winds. Some areas in Grand Bahama have been experiencing major hurricane force winds for 8 hours straight, and it's likely going to be another 8 or 12 before this thing even clears, before the hurricane winds even clear the island, much less the tropical storm force winds. It is an unbelievable situation with how strong this storm is and what the storm is doing.
The level of destruction there must be incredible.
Especially on both islands. I would think that Great Abaco, probably the wind damage would be higher. With Grand Bahama, obviously the rain damage, the water damage being way higher. But still, complete devastation likely on both islands in most areas.
Yeah, there was I saw some images off of Great Abaco, or Abaco rather, and there was some. I'm not kidding when I say this. There's trees. There was cars that were turned upside down and pushed around like toys, from in the aftermath of the storm, and then of course trees were pretty much defoliated and roofs were torn off. Just tons and tons of damage that is going to be really hard for the people of Abaco Island to recover from, unfortunately.
Let me read out some of the watches and warnings which have been updated. The National Hurricane Center extended a lot of these warnings at 11 o'clock, so you may not have heard of them yet. A storm surge warning is now in effect for Lantana to the Flagler-Volusia County line. A storm surge watch for north of Deerfield Beach to south of Lantana, and from Flagler-Volusia County line all the way to the Savannah River. A hurricane warning still for the Grand Bahama and the Abacus Islands in the northwestern Bahamas, and Jupiter Inlet to the Flagler-Volusia County line. A hurricane watch for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and the Flagler-Volusia County line to the Altamaha Sound, Georgia. A tropical storm warning for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet, and a tropical storm watch for north of Golden Beach to Deerfield Beach and Lake Okeechobee. The National Hurricane Center expect the following hazards and the extent of these hazards written down here. So, first of all, the wind, obviously. Catastrophic hurricane conditions continue on Grand Bahama Island. Do not venture out into the eye, as winds will suddenly increase after this eye passes. Just a little thing on that. Has the eye passed the island now? Are there any areas on that island in the eye at this point?
The extreme northern part of Stone Island.
Yeah, according to radar, yes, Grand Bahama is still on the.
Okay.
Yeah. Southern side, rather.
Hurricane conditions are expected within the hurricane warning area in Florida by late tonight or Tuesday. Hurricane conditions are possible in the hurricane watch area on Wednesday. Tropical storm conditions are expected within the tropical storm warning area today and Tuesday, and are possible in the tropical storm watch area by tonight. A life-threatening storm surge will raise water levels by as much as 18 to 23 feet above normal tide levels in areas of onshore winds on Grand Bahama Island. Near the coast, the surge will be accompanied by large and destructive waves. Water levels should very slowly subside on the Abaco Islands during the day. The combination of a dangerous storm surge with the tide will cause normally dry areas near the coast to be flooded by rising waters moving inland from the shoreline. So these are the following heights if it strikes at high tide. Lantana to the Savannah River, 4 to 7 feet. North of Deerfield Beach to Lantana, 2 to 4 feet. Water levels could begin to rise well in advance of the arrival of the strong winds. As for rainfall, northwestern Bahamas, we're expecting a further, You know what? I'm not actually sure whether they're talking about a further amount of rainfall or they're just saying rainfall totals. So I assume that that doesn't mean a further amount of rainfall of this value or not. Not so sure. Anyway, northwestern Bahamas 12 to 24 inches, isolated 30. That's been the case for some time. Central Bahamas, here we go. Additional 1 to 3 inches, isolated storm totals of 6 inches. Coastal Carolinas 5 to 10 inches, isolated 15. And the Atlantic coast from the Florida Peninsula through Georgia 4 to 8 inches, isolated 10. This rainfall may cause life-threatening flash floods. Large swells are affecting east-facing shores of the Bahamas and the Florida East Coast today and will spread northward along the southeastern U.S. coast during the next few days. These swells are likely to cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. Please consult products from your local weather office. And also, isolated tornadoes are possible this afternoon into tonight along the immediate coast of east central Florida. The eye of the storm. Just looking at some temperatures, we are constantly watching the eye temperature of this storm. I can actually tell you that after the eye temperature dropped earlier, which is a sign of weakening, to about 9 degrees Celsius, it is now back up to 13. What's also quite clear on this imagery that we're looking at is the northwestern side has really been failing quite a bit in those recent frames, and it's becoming more clear that there is a gap there, and I don't know whether anyone wants to speculate that there might be something going on. Could we possibly be talking about a dry slot?
I've got a rapid scan imagery up right now, and you can really see that a large part of the western eyewall seems to be eroding away here, at least on infrared. And you can definitely see a noticeable gap in there. That could potentially be a dry slot. I'm not 100% sure about that, though. One thing I can tell you is that this storm is likely starting to suffer due to massive upwelling. What this basically means is that when this storm passes over these waters are 28, 29, 30 degrees Celsius in freedom units. That's about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. So what that ends up meaning is that you have this hurricane here. It's pulling up all the heat out of this water. So as the storm's strengthening, it's actually cooling off the water underneath it. So it's going to end up using up all the energy underneath it. So now the temperatures are going to go down underneath the storm from where it was like 28, 29, maybe isolated 30 down to 25, 26. And 25, 26 degrees is a massive difference from 28 or 29. 25, 26 won't sustain a category 4 or 5 hurricane. And what will end up happening is that the storm will slowly degrade and weaken because what is happening is essentially the same thing as when it goes over land. Fuel sources going away. So it's just going to end up starting to weaken.
We as forecasters, we know all about the potential for upwelling when a storm stalls. So why do you think the National Hurricane Center yesterday forecasted the storm to stall but remain a Category 5 until tonight?
Probably because it was 185 miles an hour.
So
that's just how strong the storm was.
Has it therefore weakened quicker than we might have expected?
Honestly, it strengthened quicker than we expected. But so this weakening kind of cancels that out. Honestly, so yeah, I don't know how to really respond to that. Is it weakening fast? I would say that it's weakening about the rate that you would expect a storm to weaken as it's moving into waters that can no longer sustain its strength. If you take a look at the storm right now, I have something up on screen share. I don't know if you're showing it on the stream or not.
Yeah, in and out.
But what I have is what I have up on my screen is that I have a combination of visible and infrared. I have visible on the bottom, and I have an infrared layer laid on top of it. So you can really see both the outflow that you would get from the visible, and then you get the bonus of seeing the infrared, of seeing where the weaknesses in the storms are. And you can really see, if my computer would stop freezing up here, you can really see on the latest frames, the western side of the eye seems to be opening up, which is a definite sign of weakening. It's a loss of structure within the storm.
So what will happen if the storm, out of the blue, starts speeding up again, say towards the northwest? Very warm waters, the Gulf Stream, potential chance of re-intensification, and by how much?
Yes, there is always the potential of re-intensification once it starts moving back over warm waters. We thought that the storm wasn't going to intensify up to 185 miles an hour in the waters it was before. Clearly it did. And the factors going into the storm's intensity really don't think are going to be changing over the next few days. So how much could it re-intensify by? It depends on how much time the storm actually ends up having before it either ends up stalling again, which will likely not be the case, or moving over land, which would just about be the worst case scenario at this time.
I just want to point out as well that this isn't the only thing that's going on around the world or even around the Atlantic right now. There are 3 areas of interest in the next 48 hours, and actually 4 areas of interest for the next 5 days in the Atlantic. Number 1 there on the right-hand side is an area of interest that is almost got a center of circulation, already has 35-mile-an-hour winds. That will most likely become our next named storm in the next 2 days. Number 2 on the left-hand side, chances are increasing on that one as well. 40% chance in the next 48 hours. I'm not sure on the 5-day, 50% chance in 5 days on that. That one is going to move west towards somewhere around the Mexico-Texas border. And number 3 there out in the open Atlantic, 30% chance in the next 2 days, 50% in the next 5 days. That one's going to move, I think, towards the north or northeast. It appears that the first one there, the one with the highest chance, will move towards the northwest. And long-range models suggesting that something behind that over Africa could come out into the Atlantic and develop into a hurricane, but early indications showing it will probably recurve, but it's far too soon to even speculate on that, and that is probably what we're going to be looking at next week. But that is the Atlantic picture. The Eastern Pacific has Tropical Storm Juliet, which will probably become a hurricane later today. And in the Western Pacific, we have 2 cyclones active. Tropical Storm Ling Ling, which was named by the Japanese Meteorological Agency last night. Moving past the Philippines, Signal 1 warnings in effect for the Batanes Islands, and that one is likely to head towards the Korean Peninsula, and Tropical Depression 14W, which will probably remain weak out in the open Pacific. So I just wanted to give a mention to those systems, because we probably won't get to again, because Dorian is still stealing the show absolutely, and it is a terrible scenario. Still worse than we could ever have imagined, even though it has now weakened to Category 4 status.
Yeah, the only thing that we can really do is just kind of hope that this storm turns up to the north and then up to the northeast and hopefully buggers off forever.
Well,
that's really all that we can hope for right now. The trough is probably a good 24 hours away from starting to pick it up. So it's really just going to meander around in this area probably until tomorrow morning.
At the risk of hyperanalyzing this thing, I can now say that the center of the storm's eye is still lifting up north of the latest National Hurricane Center forecast track, 4 miles north of where they're expected. It could, of course, switch back very quickly if it turned towards the west, but at the minute, it is staying east of the forecast, and it was east of the last forecast from 5 a.m. as well. So it's a slow trend at the minute, but if it does keep up going east of the track forecast, those cones will shift back towards the east slowly but surely. But I think we can't get around the fact at this point that the storm surge is and certainly the rip current risk is huge along the east coast of Florida. Storm surge possible, significant rainfall amounts. Hurricane force conditions still not a given in Florida just yet, but tropical storm force winds are definitely going to happen along the eastern coast. And Devon, with
Yeah.
the upheaval in the storm right now, do you think the wind field will be expanding?
The wind field should definitely be expanding. I mean, you can definitely in Florida should expect to basically the east coast of Florida between Cape Canaveral and Fort Lauderdale should be experiencing tropical storm force winds at some point today, sustained.
Let's see now if we can get the same kind of imagery here on the water vapor, which I suppose would be the best way of seeing whether there might be some dry air intrusion. You're probably more well versed with this imagery than I am in detecting the dry air, Devon, but I don't know if you can see the stream from where you're at and whether we can make any conclusions.
I'll go ahead and pull up the dry air on slider here. See what I'm able to look at.
Still moving incredibly slowly, this storm.
All I can say is that the air is still sinking dramatically within the storm, and I'm not really seeing any noticeable dry air getting into the storm. Maybe if I just hold on here.
Interesting.
Go ahead and see if I can.
All I can say at this point, the latest estimates right now is that the storm is moving at about 3 miles an hour to the northwest. That's in the last hour or so. And of course, we can look at this extremely closely just to get the wider picture. Let me just load up some more imagery and tell you how far it's moved and in which direction over the last 4 hours, which will tell us quite a lot more than what a 1 hour trend is looking at like. So just computing some numbers here as we go along. The last 4 hours it's moved northwest by about 9 miles.
Oh, yay, it's moving at 2 miles an hour.
2 miles an hour.
That's a lot better than 1 mile an hour.
Well,
that's like twice as fast.
It totally is.
So that
okay.
is some good news. One thing I can say is that I don't see any extremely noticeable dry slot on the water vapor imagery that doesn't appear on any other infrared imagery that I'm looking at. One thing I can say is that at least on the slider imagery that is on my screen, if it would stop glitching out, the weakness on the western side of that eyewall seems to it seems to be getting more apparent. I'm starting to see more whites popping up in the eye.
I'm seeing that too. There's some radar imagery as well. In response to that, though, Devon, we'll get to that radar shortly. In response to that, the southern side is starting to blow up a few red colors down there too.
Oh yeah, I mean, you gotta. If the storm's gonna maintain intensity, it's gotta blow up elsewhere, and it's gonna try its best to maintain intensity.
Isaac, over to you with the latest radar.
Here you can see on the radar what Devin and you guys are talking about that potential dry slot in the storm. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in more. You can see it a little bit better here. You can see it starts over onto the eastern side and then trains itself by the looks of it, maybe possibly into the eye itself. I was going to load a loop on this, but it's not loading for me right now, so I'm just going to take it full. But you can see there possible dry air intrusion, and you can really see outer bands being felt on eastern Florida right now from Dorian. So they're getting some scattered rain showers over there near Daytona Beach, Hollywood, Florida, West Palm Beach, etc., and all those places. But just wanted to note that. Go ahead, guys.
There were 1 or 2 places that had severe thunderstorm warnings and even apparently a tornado warning last night. We are starting to see some flood warnings appearing in Florida now as well, so I'm just going to see if we can read out some of these. A river flood warning has been issued for the St. Johns River above Lake Harney near Geneva. Heavy rain from the storm will push that river level up this week. We'll reach minor flood stage late this week. A river flood warning for the St. John's River at Astor. The Withlacoochee at Holder and Peace River at Bartow under flood warnings at this point. And that's it in central Florida. Looking further north, there are some coastal flood warnings in effect. And I'm just going to try and get that to you as well. Some coastal flood advisories too. Early stages in assessing the flood risk. And of course it can change a lot. A deviation west of the storm's track will lead to more flooding problems. Coastal flood warning until 8 a.m. Thursday. The National Weather Service in Jacksonville for inland waterways of inland northeast Florida, including the St. Johns River Basin and tributaries. Increasing up to 2 to 4 feet above ground level Tuesday and Wednesday. Coastal flooding is now being observed in San Mateo and Dunn's Creek. Just looking as well, St. Mary's River at McClenny affecting Baker, Nassau and Charlton counties. So there's a flood warning there as well. Minor flooding forecasted. And coastal flood advisories also in effect in that region. High surf advisory as well, and a high rip current risk remaining in effect naturally. But nothing in terms of heavy thunderstorms or anything like that just at this time, but there are a lot of scattered showers occurring over Florida at this time. Tim, do you have any news for us? Because I know time and again you've been looking at the preparedness measures and any information about evacuations and the like.
Yes, Nathan, there are multiple evacuations in Florida and Georgia. I'm actually going to go through all of them because there was a bunch that was released this morning. Brevard County has a mandatory evacuation order that started as of 8 o'clock this morning. Duval County has mandatory evacuations for zones A and B effective 8 o'clock this morning. If you live in Florida, you will want to go on to the Florida Disaster website to determine what zone you do live in and determine if you're in that evacuation order or not. Indian River County has mandatory evacuations for the barrier islands east of U.S. Route 1. Martin County has mandatory evacuations that went into effect as of 1 o'clock yesterday. Nassau County has mandatory evacuations for zones A, C, and F. Again, you'll probably want to look at your local county map to see which zone you fall into there. Palm Beach County started mandatory evacuations for those that live in zones A and B as of 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon. St. Johns County has mandatory evacuations for, starting 8 a.m. this morning, so those evacuations are underway. St. Lucie County started evacuations as of 2 o'clock yesterday. Volusia County had mandatory evacuations that started at 10 o'clock this morning, and that's just in Florida. And then Georgia has mandatory evacuations for Camden, Chatham, Glenn, Liberty, and McIntosh counties east of Interstate 95. That went into effect yesterday, and the governor is instituting westerly contraflow on Interstate 16 effective 8 a.m. Tuesday morning. So that's just a small snippet of the evacuations and logistical efforts that both the Florida and Georgia governments are putting in effect in order to get everybody out of harm's way
And
ahead
Tim,
of Dorian.
do you have any links that people can follow for that information?
Yes, the Florida evacuation orders can be found on floridadisaster.org. The Georgia evacuations, I'll actually have to see if I can find a good link to it. This was just off of one of the local medias. It's actually on. Let me find out which news outlet this is. The evacuation orders for Georgia is on WJCL's website. That is a news affiliate out of Georgia.
All right. Back to Isaac's imagery, which is now animated radar of the storm. Anything else you want to tell us about this?
Just seeing increased scattered thunderstorms and showers, eastern Florida here. You can see how the eye wall has been doing over the past 2 frames. This is about, I think, 2 or 3 hours of radar imagery in total. And you can still see that kind of what appears to be possibly a dry slot or a part in between the eye wall and the outer bands by the looks of it. Um, but you can still quite clearly see the eye wall over the northern, I think that's Greater Bahama Island, if I'm not mistaken, right, Nathan?
Grand Bahama.
Grand Bahama, yeah, northern Grand Bahama, the eye is still over, unfortunately,
Yep.
as it still progressively moves slowly. But go ahead, guys.
Just one more thing there. Looking at the radar, which is quite often more useful than the satellite, even though we can see it on visible now. What direction would you say it is moving there on radar?
Well, it looked like it did, in the first 3 frames, it did a little trichodal wobble. I can't even say that right. Trichodal, I can't even say it right. Trichodal
Wobble.
wobble in the first 3 frames there, to a little bit to the south. And then now it looks like it may be heading on a northwestern course, in the latest frames, but that's what I...
That appears to be what it is doing at this time. Northwest 9 miles in the last 4 hours or so. So that is 2 miles an hour northwest when you average it all out. But yes, there are lots of wobbles going on. Northerly, even a southerly wobble that happened last night apparently. But at the moment, the trend is that it's moving northwesterly or near northwesterly at about 2 miles per hour. We're back with some visible imagery of the storm at this time, and you can see the eye very clearly. Rapid information, at least from the satellite perspective, is always coming into us, with new data coming in all the time, every minute or so. The eye temperature is increasing at this time. It's now up clearly above 13 degrees Celsius. We started about 2 hours ago. It dropped to a minimum of about 9 degrees Celsius. The fact that it's gone up to 13 degrees is a sign of strengthening, or is it? Because is it just a counteractive move for the weakening western eye wall? Devon, is it continuing in the western eye wall?
That's what I'm trying to figure out here. It kind of looks like that it's still trying to open up there. If you look at radar, there's also a little bit of a notch over there in the western eye wall. I've decided to switch the imagery on my screen from just a standard infrared to a water vapor imagery overlay, so you can really see where the browns, reds, oranges, all that is. Where that is where all the dry air is. So you can definitely see dry air is on the northern part of the cyclone. We also have it here on the western part of Florida. And so this storm is moving towards that region. Of course, that could also be popping up just because that's what the upper level anticyclone of the storm is producing. But I'm just trying to see if there is any noticeable deterioration of that western eye wall there. It does seem like it's trying to close itself back off
It
in the
does.
latest frames. I don't know if this is going to be re-strengthening, though. We're going to just have to wait for recon at this point.
And what is the status on the recon planes right now, anyone?
That is a good question. I just got booted off the internet like 5 minutes ago, so I'm still trying to get everything back up.
I believe they're still in route.
They are currently, I'd say, roughly 30 miles north of Orlando.
Seems about right, but yeah.
Yeah, they're still en route.
Yeah, the plane is about 30 miles due north of Orlando, Florida right now.
Alright, we have just had a short gap in coverage there because some stuff was going on here. But there is the satellite imagery once again. There is a little blow up occurring south of Lake Okeechobee there that just occurred briefly. Looks like it's fizzling out in the later frames, but we're looking at scattered showers and thunderstorms occurring over Florida today. The tropical storm wind field lies only about, I think, only a couple dozen, if that, miles off the coast of Florida. And that will reach the shore, we're pretty sure, in the next few hours this afternoon. I suppose at this time we could see if we could take some questions here. Could the storm intensify since it's back out over warm waters? We sort of answered that earlier, or did we? There is the potential, but probably not by very much, right?
Yes, but the storm actually has to get back out over warm waters first, and warm waters is not where it's at right now.
Yeah, it's still over the northern part of Grand Bahamas.
Not just is it over the northern half of Grand Bahama, but it's also over the same waters that it's been slowly pooling energy from. So those waters have really gone down in intensity in sea surface temperatures as of late. So there's that.
Alright, what are the chances that this storm has a major shift west and makes landfall in the Carolinas and goes inland? And another question there, could it still make a landfall in South Carolina? Well, I guess at this point we're going to show you the model spread, which is rather interesting today because for the first time in quite a while, none of the major models are now predicting a Florida landfall anymore. That's not necessarily good news because a lot of those models still have hurricane force winds trailing along the east coast of Florida pretty much most of the way up. Looks like it might spare Georgia just about, but storm surge will be more of an issue for that location, I should imagine, and rainfall. And then for South Carolina, North Carolina, they're still looking at the models getting very close to land. HWRF, at an earlier model run, I think it's still on here, has it just clipping the South Carolina coast, and then some of the model runs there have the storm making landfall in North Carolina towards the Outer Banks.
I'd just like to take a stop. If we can go back to Isaac here. He's got is that storm relative velocities?
No, it's base velocity. I'm just looking at the farther out velocity, so I was curious about
That's
it.
base
It's not the
velocity.
most
Okay.
reliable.
Well, if you take a look at that, just take a look at how strong those velocities are. This is clearly still a very powerful hurricane. Almost honestly looks like a tornado when you take a look at that signature, when you have literally the couple of the red and the greens together, and you can see the really bright greens and the really bright reds right next to each other. It really, really does look like a tornado signature. So this thing is still packing at least Category 4 winds in there.
And these darker shades that you see on the radar, that's not like 20 mile an hour. Well, these are 20 mile an hour winds, but it's what I believe is happening is that the winds are so high that the radar is kind of glitching out a little bit, since it's kind of far out as well too with height. So it's reading those higher winds and it's kind of glitching out and going back to the lower values, just to show you how powerful Dorian is still.
And there is a longer range loop of how the storm's been looking on one of our panels here. The intensity information at the bottom isn't correct anymore. It's 155 miles an hour. Pressure is still 922. That's from yesterday. But you can, as you look at the imagery, you can see the storm's movement and just how little movement there has been, and it's been moving towards a northwesterly direction as we leave that imagery there. Let's go back to the latest infrared. 1 minute imagery here again, and this is pretty much right up to the second. Every time that we are not commentating on this, we show you pretty much this imagery, and you can watch it minute by minute live on our stream when we're not talking. But you can see the latest image is just 1 minute old, so we can see firsthand straight away whether the western eyewall is building back in or not. And Devon, I think the answer might be in the affirmative on that.
It does appear to be that way, at least temporarily. I think I'm going to need to see a few more frames. But the eye itself is still not looking very circular. It's looking to be a lot more ellipsoidal at this point. So even though the eyewall itself seems to be getting a little bit stronger, that eye is clearly still deteriorating in structure, at least on the infrared imagery. If you take a look, at least what I'm taking a look at on stream, which is the past 48 minutes of imagery, and again, I've got the water vapor up.
Yep.
The last 48 minutes of imagery, you can see at the start it looks really circular, and then towards the end you can just see how ellipsoidal that eye ends up turning into. So that to me, an ellipsoidal eye means a lot more of a structural change and a lot more of a weakening than, say, a quick blow up of -70 cloud tops on the southern end of the
Yeah.
Eyewall. So I believe that this storm is still on a weakening trend, even though the eye may have gotten a little bit warmer, a little bit clearer, and the cloud tops might be blown up. That structural change is a big thing.
We just had a question about whether an eyewall replacement cycle is occurring. What is the situation with the one or multiple eyewalls in the storm right now?
Isaac, you got radar. Go ahead.
Oh, I just turned it off right when you said that.
Oh, damn it.
Put it back on.
I'm looking at National Weather Service radar, and that is about as low res and awful as you can.
Put it back on a loop there. And Devin, you can look at this too and make what you want on the loop, but I can still see that kind of double eyewall looking feature on the side and what appears to be a separation between the two bands there. It looked like it tried to fix itself in a few of the frames there, and now it's coming back out again. And you can see that it's starting to become. Let me actually stop the frame here.
Looks like
and you can see it.
It looks like that there's a, if you pause it on that last image, there you go. You can clearly see there's a massive gap that's building here in the storm, and you can clearly see a massive deterioration there of the western eyewall on Dorian. So you can see that there is a gap, so potentially some dry air is actually getting into the storm as it continues to weaken.
That's the best news we've heard
cooler
all
water.
week.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So this is definitely a weakening structure that we are currently seeing on Dorian. It does look like the western eyewall is collapsing, and I don't think that outer eyewall looking type thingy is really an outer eyewall. So this doesn't look like an eyewall replacement cycle is happening either. So this looks like that the storm is just straight up weakening.
Let's go over to see what Tim's showing us right now as well.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same similar radar that Isaac has. This is the enhanced data display off the National Weather Service. And a couple things I do want to point out is the direction that it had been going. I had been using this through most of late last night, and my mouse cursor kind of got outlined where it has gone through. It came in off the eastern side of Grand Bahama, and then actually centered over to the southern edge, just south of East Grand Bahama. And looking at where it's at now, it does look like it's been taking more of a northwesterly trend. And looking at it, and you kind of pointed on it, Devin, there is a breakdown in the structure there, clearly on the northwestern side. You can actually see
Oh, yes. Look at that.
thickness of the western eyewall has really eroded. You see how it was really thick through there probably about 15 minutes ago, and it's really started weakening off that western side. There's not much there. I can actually stop it on the last frame there so you guys can really take a look at it. You can actually see where right there, you can see where how thick the rest of the eyewall is on the whole other side of it, but right through there looks like where we're seeing a lot of breaks on that western eyewall. So that could be indicative of it weakening considerably.
However, at the present time, it is still a high-end Category 4 storm on the Sappho-Simpson scale. The authorities definitely aren't taking this lightly at all. I still don't think they should. Definitely not. After we've seen already what's happened in the Bahamas. Just to reiterate the warnings, if you've just joined us, a storm surge warning now in effect for Lantana to the Flagler-Volusia County line, a storm surge watch for north of Deerfield Beach to south of Lantana, and the Flagler-Volusia County line to the Savannah River. A hurricane warning for Grand Bahama and the Abacos Islands in the northwestern Bahamas, and Jupiter Inlet to the Flagler-Volusia County line. A hurricane watch for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and the Flagler-Volusia County line to the Altamaha Sound, Georgia. A tropical storm warning for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet, and a tropical storm watch for north of Golden Beach to Deerfield Beach and Lake Okeechobee. One thing that we haven't shown you so far that we really ought to before we've still got another 15 minutes to run here, is this, and well, we'll bring it on the other screen just a minute here. there's again the imagery and the rainfall chart, which is showing what's expected from the storm over the next 5 to 7 days. And they're still expecting along the east coast of Florida in excess of 6 inches of rainfall, just about along the coast of Georgia and South Carolina as well. North Carolina could get over 10 inches of rain potentially. Absolutely, if the storm makes landfall, you'd be looking at 10 to 12 or maybe more inches in terms of rainfall. We still don't know whether the storm will make landfall up there or not, but it's looking pretty close, and I'm sure Tim will be watching it very closely. You're obviously in North Carolina. I guess I should ask at this point, how are people there treating the storm in their perceptions?
There have been a few murmurs of people getting prepared, as obviously with most everybody, as soon as everybody sees that they're in the cone, they want to lose their minds. I have not been out yet to see just how bad the stores are in terms of supplies, because I'm like probably the rest of some of the viewers, I'm not fully confident on this northern track and northeastern track that we've been seeing with the models. So until that becomes a little bit more crystal clear, I myself probably will not be getting set to hunker down like I did during Florence. I mean, Florence, we had a little bit more certainty on. Dorian, there's just so much uncertainty on
Well, yeah, for
how
your
close
state,
it's going to get.
it's still 4 days out.
Exactly.
And let's remind ourselves again that the storm, the center of the hurricane, could pass anywhere within that cone. So that still means that there could be a landfall anywhere from, say, Jupiter all the way to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And
I guess I'm not in the latest cone, but I believe the cone before this one, I was actually located inside of the NHC cone.
And that's in Pennsylvania. But you can see the wind field. So again, that's something we got to watch out for too. Just to point out, the tropical storm wind field is about the same size as the uncertainty error on day 3 on this cone. So that is a very large area that's outside of the cone that will get tropical storm force winds. And I still don't think a lot of people actually realize that.
It should be a realization, like tropical storm force wind should be coming ashore in Florida today. Like tropical storm force wind should be there honestly by tonight. Like they're coming, and with how slow this storm's going to be moving, the tropical storm force winds are going to be staying around for a long time in that area. Which I know Floridians, they're kind of not partial to tropical storm force winds. They don't really care all that much, but it can still cause power outages. So they can still cause down power lines, down trees. So you got to be very careful. You always have to be careful of coastal flooding. High tides are going to be higher than normal, obviously, during the storm. So, you just got to make sure you had an evacuation order, you should have already gotten out, honestly. It's probably too late to go ahead and try to evacuate at this point in time. The storm is on its way.
If there's any questions for us in this hour, we've got another 15 minutes to run. After that, we will be returning back to the imagery that we're looking at on the stream. That certainly won't be deserting you at all. And we'll be back again with more coverage at 5 p.m. Eastern, along with a storm update that will appear on the stream at 3 p.m. Similar schedule to what we've had in previous days. So get some questions in. We'll do our best to answer them. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback off of what Devin had said about the impacts, not just along the coastal, but inland. I mean, these tropical storm force winds, they do extend out a good amount. And I know firsthand from Florence that even though Florence was down at the coastline, impacts were being felt 70, 80, 100 miles away, where the down power lines can be an issue, down trees will be an issue. And the rainfall, even though you see all the Eyewall activity and the heaviest rain is there, still those outer bands could still dump tremendous amounts of rain in their own right, and that will cause flooding well away from the center. So just because you're right on the edge of it and thinking, oh, I'm in the clear, No, you're not. I know firsthand. I was 80 miles away from the eye of Florence, and we still got massive flooding from the impact. So, just because you're well inland, don't think that you can't get impacted because you will.
Yeah. I put on another radar source on my screen. And see really this the amount of scattered showers that are just now popping up now due to daytime heating all around southern Florida and eastern Florida now because of Dorian. So, and you could also see
The
Dorian
eye
on the right.
is appears to be growing on that imagery.
Yeah, I guess it did an
It is
eyewall
growing.
placement cycle there, like we said, and it did a little did some wobbles there as you see, which is
Looking
indicative of
very
possible.
fragile on that western side near the end.
Yeah, I could see possibly
So
dry air
fragile.
trying to get into it, and you can see the
Um,
wobbles it does before.
I just because people are still saying, well, the storm is moving very slowly at this point, but I should point out that this storm is actually going north of the National Hurricane Center's forecast. It went north of their forecast cone from 5 a.m. by a good 13 or 14 miles. At the moment, from their 11 a.m. cone, it is now nearly 4.5 miles north of their track forecast. If this continues, which it might not, but if it does, that is good news, because the storm is a few miles further east, and that could make a big difference to some areas between getting tropical storm force winds and hurricane force winds. We certainly live in hope, but the storm could still turn back towards the west, and as we saw on that cone earlier, anywhere within the cone could get the storm's landfall, and that's pretty much Jupiter northwards by this point. But at the moment, it is still more of a northwesterly movement, which it has been doing for the last 5 hours or so. It was moving west a lot overnight, but it is now, at the moment, just north of Grand Bahama. There were a lot of questions coming in. Go ahead.
Yep, the blue colors on infrared imagery are starting to move ashore near West Palm Beach in Florida. So tropical storm force winds should be reaching them imminently.
Yeah. What are the tropical storm force wind chances for southeast New England?
It depends on what you mean by southeast New England. If you're talking
I was hoping
like
you'd help me with that one.
Yeah. If you're talking about Nantucket Island, we're probably talking about 50-50 chances. Along with Cape Cod, that's probably about 30% chance.
Yep,
If we're
30,
talking like
40%
Connecticut, if we're talking Connecticut to Rhode Island, that's like a 15 to 20% chance at this time.
Yes. People asking us for coverage on the other invests. Well, we do mention it time and again, and we will summarize with that, I suppose, in just a few minutes. Do we think the potential for power outages across Lakeland, Florida is possible?
Any place that receives tropical storm force winds can receive an extended power outage.
So if the storm does move very close to the Florida coast, then Lakeland will be under tropical storm force winds. So keep watching in places like that. Same for Orlando too.
Yeah, indeed, Nathan. Just looking at the hazards on the enhanced data display radar, Lakeland is under a tropical storm watch, even though they're well inland. So that is something you need to keep a note of. And we do have inland tropical storm warnings also for in and around Orlando, south of that. So everywhere that's west of Port St. Lucie up to Palm Beach, where we do have the hurricane warnings, there are tropical storm force warnings inland in those areas.
Hurricane hunters are now just southeast of Cape Canaveral, Florida, so they are getting pretty close to the storm.
National Hurricane Center will update in a few minutes' time. Another question there, do we think the storm will strengthen again? Looking increasingly unlikely as time goes on, if this weakening trend continues.
It depends on what ends up happening after 24 hours. If this thing weakens all the way down to, say, minimum category 3 due to upwelling, I know that's probably an extreme case, as this storm moves northward back over warm waters, it's entirely possible that it can get back up to Category 4 strength.
So a bit like Hugo then.
Exactly. So re-strengthening is definitely possible as it moves north. It is extremely difficult to tell how much re-strengthening would end up happening.
Yeah, especially with that drier part on the west there.
It's also worth mentioning that if this storm does actually have a further east trajectory than the forecast, it is going to be positioned more over the Gulf Stream. If it hugs the coast of Florida and bends around the Georgia area quite close to the coast, those sea surface temperatures are quite a bit lower there, aren't they?
Yes, they would be. Not by much. It's by about a degree, but a degree can be a big difference between like a Category 3 and a Category 5. One thing I can say is that the stronger the storm ends up being, the more it's going to interact with that trough. So if it ends up continuing to move north and east of forecast over the Gulf Stream, it could intensify more, and that should mean that the storm gets pulled further off to the north and east, which is good news for Florida. It could potentially be bad news for the Carolinas, as that could accelerate the storm northward too fast for it to move east, which would mean major hurricane impacts for the Carolinas. So it's really a double-edged sword at this point.
Not good. The update will be out in just a few moments, and we'll bring that to you, and then we will finish up here for the time being. Of course, we always leave the graphical depictions on the screen and the very latest satellite imagery, which is in front of your eyes right now. At worst, this imagery is about 4 or 5 minutes old. At best, it can be as little as 1 minute old. So this imagery is some of the most recent that you will see anywhere. And we continue to see the development, or perhaps the dismantlement, of that western eyewall if it's still occurring. But from what I'm seeing on this imagery, it is still very much there, but radar does really take more precedent than satellite. And let's just see, Isaac, is your imagery completely up to date?
Yep. I'm updating right now as we speak, so I might be stuttering a little bit.
So there again is more recent imagery, and that western side of the eyewall is extremely fragile at this point. Those last frames there.
It, I can't.
Pardon?
If you need me to stop the loop.
Yeah, please.
Get it.
Stop at the last frame there, and we'll be able to see the fragility of the western eyewall in those latest frames. And
there you go.
The question, I guess, then is, if it does collapse on the western side, what happens then?
Further weakening.
Will it get an eyewall back?
I think that entire
it would make it, if the eyewall does take significant damage, it would make it far more difficult to strengthen as it moves northward.
Well, that's certainly what we're hoping for. We can't say that is happening yet. The eyewall is still there, but looking very flaky on the western side. Very interesting radar imagery that we're looking at.
I actually think we had a complete break on the western eyewall looking off of a data display.
Hold on, let's bring us back to your imagery here. We're all looking at things. Your radar imagery. Wow, it's really close.
Yeah, you can see it there just right off of the western side there, and it does look like the eyewall is almost completely fractured there.
The National Hurricane Center have put out their 1 p.m. update. The eye of Dorian wobbling near Grand Bahama Island. No change to the intensity, 155 miles per hour and a pressure of 922 millibars. They have it moving west-northwest at 1 mile per hour. It's at 26.8 north, 78.4 west, 25 miles from Freeport, Grand Bahama. Wind gusts of 190 miles per hour are still expected and possibly occurring over Grand Bahama right now, and a storm surge of 18 to 23 feet above normal tide levels, with higher destructive waves are possible on those islands. The east coast of Florida, parts of it under a hurricane warning at this time. Just to reiterate those warnings, a storm surge warning for Lantana to the Flagler-Volusia County line, a storm surge watch for north of Deerfield Beach to south of Lantana and Flagler-Volusia County line to the Savannah River, a hurricane warning for Grand Bahama and the Abacos Islands in the northwestern Bahamas, and Jupiter Inlet to the Flagler-Volusia County line, a hurricane watch for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and the Flagler-Volusia County line to the Altamaha Sound, Georgia. Tropical storm warning for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet, and a tropical storm watch for north of Golden Beach to Deerfield Beach and Lake Okeechobee. Final word from our team at this point, because we're finishing up here.
Just make sure, if you're in northern Florida, this is now the time, if you have not gotten out of your mandatory evacuation regions, this is now the time to make sure that you go ahead and do that. So that's pretty much the last chance that you're going to get. For those that are in the West Palm Beach area, in surrounding areas, north or south, their time is pretty much up. I would say that it's starting to get unsafe to go ahead and travel out in the storm at this time, as if it pushes any further west, it will bring sustained tropical storm force winds directly on shore, and that will absolutely be not good for any travelers out on any of the highways there in Florida. So those in that region should already be in their shelters, and if you have not evacuated, it is probably a good idea to just try to find the safest part in your home and ride this one out.
Well, we'll have more coverage throughout the day. The National Hurricane Centers, they are doing hourly updates. Their next intermediate advisory is in an hour. Is that right?
That should be.
Yep, 2 p.m. and they'll do a full advisory at 5 p.m. We're doing an update here on the live stream, a video at 3 p.m. and we'll be back with more live discussion at the 5 p.m. advisory. In the meantime, we're going to leave you with this imagery showing the storm's latest. It's not moving very quickly, it remains extremely dangerous. Thanks for watching.